Let's talk about normal business of government and this announcement from your department today that the government plans to bring forward by a year the date to remove coal from the UK's energy mix to 2024. How much coal are we currently using to generate electricity, and why are we able to bring that date forward?
So a number of years ago, we set into law that 2025 would be the deadline for producing electricity from coal. So those coal-powered power stations saw that line and started to change the way they did business. And as a result of that investment by those coal-fired power stations, we are now able to bring that forwards, partly because they are no longer using coal, but also because we have a huge growth in our renewable sector, in particular in offshore wind. We're world leading in terms of we own, I think, nearly 29% of all the offshore wind that's generating electricity at the moment. So we're able to move away from coal more quickly, and those three power stations that are still doing so will come offline with coal-produced electricity by 2024.
We've got an awful lot of our power stations coming offline in the next few years, and no particular plans to get any more up and running. There seems to be a feeling we're against coal, we're against nuclear, fracking for gas. Realistically, we're not going to be able to rely on wind and solar power purely for our energy needs. We know we need the backup, at the very least, a backup of other power generation. What are we going to rely on?
So we are absolutely supporting nuclear, and we're investing in a lot of new nuclear, both in terms of gigawatt nuclear Hinkley Point C, which is being built at the moment, and we are committed. The Prime Minister was committed in his 10-point plan, the Energy White Paper, to at least one more gigawatt, what I call a big nuclear plant. And we are also investing in, if you like, the next generation, the small modular reactor technology, so that can then come on mix in the years ahead.
But how many years ahead? That's the issue, isn't it? There's a lot of energy experts predicted that actually we are not going to have the certainty about our energy. We're going to have not just, well, these brownouts, they're called, where we're actually going to have real problems with actually providing enough electricity for everybody in this country at all times. We're a first world country. We shouldn't be getting into that position, should we?
So there is absolutely no reason to think we will. Security of supply will always be the government's most important focus, and we will have gas-powered power stations, of which we have a number now, continuing to act, as you say, as that balancing mix. And there is already work ongoing to think about how we do work to reduce, effectively to decarbonise those industries, and indeed potentially to look at putting a mix of hydrogen through there as well to reduce the carbon intensity of those. But that will continue along with our nuclear base to be, if you like, the base load and that balancing power. But as we grow our renewable sector, of course, that becomes a really powerful part of our mix, and of course that's the challenge we've set ourselves: net zero by 2050.
For your brief, Mr. Trevelyan, UK's commitment on coal as part of our green credentials are certainly impressive. So why are we opening a new coal mine in Cumbria?
So the announcement today is that we have brought forwards by a year. We had set a 2025 moratorium on coal being used, unabated coal being used to generate electricity. We've brought that forward by a year to 2024 because we've been able to move to a much larger mix of renewables than I think, when that 2025 date was set, which is fantastic news. And I think, as you say, is a really a credit to the shift in our electricity generation. There is coal used, as you say, coking coal used in heavy intense industries like steel and others, where there is still a need because technology hasn't yet found an alternative solution. But that coal isn't burning for the purpose of electricity generation, and that's what our announcement today is about. But in terms of the question of whether the new coking coal mine would be opened in Cumbria, that's presently being reviewed through the planning system by MHCLG, and I think they're due to report on that by the end of the year.
But why do we need a new coking coal mine? Is it because it's in a constituency that the Conservatives won in 2017?
No, coking coal, as I say, will continue to need to be used for a number of years yet, though as part of the industrial decarbonisation strategy, which I published a couple of months ago, we have a big focus on helping those heavy energy industries to find new ways to do their business, including the steel industry, who are working very hard to look at a number of alternate technologies. But until that point, there will be a need for coking coal. So if we don't use UK sourced, it will have to be imported for the time being.
Let's also talk about our fellow European Union citizens who live in this country. There are millions of them in this country. It turns out actually far more than, I think 1.6 million more than the government had thought living in this country, who've got a right to apply to stay and remain in this country after the Brexit under the EU settlement scheme. Today is the deadline for EU citizens to register. There's been a lot of publicity and a lot of efforts to try and make sure as many people register as possible. But we know that there are many, many of those people who've got every right to be in this country, very welcome in this country, working here, living here, but who have not applied for it. Are we in danger of ending up in a Windrush style situation in a few decades' time, where there are people who've got every right to be in this country suddenly finding they're being sent home, unable to access the NHS and the like, because they haven't got that documentation? And what's the government going to do about that?
So the scheme has been running for a long time. My mother, who is French, applied, and actually it was very easy, much to her own surprise, a really slick process. And as you say, 5.2 million people have applied and been processed very efficiently through the system. If there are any who are still in the system who applied in recent weeks, that will be processed in the weeks ahead. But I think it's been an extraordinarily successful scheme. And as you say, many of those who are here will now be able to, relax and continue to be part of our...
What about the people who haven't applied? They don't apply by today. The people who don't know about this, people who've been focusing, doing other things, don't see the publicity. What do they do?
So there's been, enormous publicity and indeed outreach to find everyone who's with that. And they've, indeed, as you say, today is the deadline. But I think there has been an enormous amount of time and work gone on to ensure that we do reach all those for whom this is something they want to take up.
Okay. What can you tell us about the 5.2 million people who've applied for the settlement scheme? Tens of thousands have not got their application processed as yet. It's being described as potentially a new Windrush. What do you want to say about that?
So it's been a phenomenal scheme. My mother, who is French but has lived in the UK for most of her life, applied, and it was a very, very efficient, process for her to do. And it is a phenomenal effort that, as you say, 5.2 million people have applied and been through this process. And I am sure that there will be the ability to make sure that today the appropriate conversations are had. But it is an extraordinary effort, and one that to the fact that sometimes government processes can be difficult. This one was a really effective and slick one for those 5.2 million people to be able to make sure that they have
you say that. But there's 300,000 backlog. 300,000 people are still waiting to be processed. Are we going to start denying them benefits?
So I imagine if they're in the system, that they will then be processed. So that will be I think that the deadline is today for applications, and that's been announced. There's been a very long period for people to have time to apply, and that comes to an end today. But I have no doubt that if they're in the system and the processing is ongoing, that will follow its natural course.
Yeah, but does that mean that they will still receive benefits while they're being processed?
So you'd have to ask Thomas. I don't have the information on that, but I think the idea was always that this is a steady path, and that those who are, here and were applying for, the ability to stay will therefore be, in that process.
Before we get on to the business of government, should we get on to the business of football last night? What do you make of England's victory over Germany 2-0, going into, of course, the quarter-finals of the Euro 2020 Championship?
Just fantastic news, isn't it? Didn't they do just so well? Honestly, I keep grinning and just sort of thinking that's just amazing. The next generation of footballers, absolutely cool as cucumber, weren't they? They just took it on, went out there, played some fantastic football, and won the match, and through they go to the next round. Really exciting.
Well, through they go to the next round against Ukraine in Rome, but no tickets are going to be sold to England fans to travel to Rome, not even in a bubble, as we had, of course, with the Champions League in Portugal, their final. Do you think that England fans are being denied the right to see their fans, to see their team, when, of course, the UEFA officials, the big wigs, the rich people, they'll be able to do it? It's, again, a little bit of a feeling of one rule for them, one rule for the rest of us.
So the whole point about that is to make sure that we keep everybody safe. And I have every confidence that every pub, every family house will be cheering from the rafters. And I would set the whole country the challenge of making sure that they can hear us from Rome.
Italy next. What's the advice, the government advice for fans who'd like to go and watch them play?
So the advice has been clearly set out, and as your correspondent said, honestly, it's very difficult not to smile just to see all those wonderful flags waving, isn't it? It just makes you so proud of our team doing so well last night. But really, the ask is to watch from home and to cheer on the team as loud as you can. I think the challenge is, can they hear us from Rome? And I'm sure we'll take up that opportunity to be as supportive as we can of our amazing England team.
Did you see some of the scenes, not just in Wembley, but of course the fan zones, some of them penned in with, with scaffolding poles? Social distancing went out the window very, very quickly. This lockdown's over now, isn't it?
So I think the key point is that as we've had this phenomenal vaccine rollout, and I encourage everyone who hasn't yet had their vaccine to get out there and have one. We are moving towards, I hope very soon, the opportunity for normality where people can go about their daily lives without those restrictions. And I think that is the key, but making sure that everyone has that vaccine to protect all of us is critical to ensuring we get back to normal as soon as possible.
Okay.
We certainly will. Can I ask you about COVID? There's a lot of stories in the newspapers this morning ahead of Terminus Day on the 19th of July, we all hope, fingers crossed. There has been talk from the government about learning to live with COVID. What does that actually mean to you?
So now that we are, at very nearly a kind of fully vaccinated adult population, a phenomenal effort. And, we've all, in the same way that we cheered on our football team last night, to be honest, we really cheering on all those who've been jabbing our arms to make sure that we have the vaccination. And once all adults have had that first jab, and we are very nearly at all the over 40s, it will mean that those most vulnerable to very ill health from COVID are protected. So making sure that then we can get our economy and our day-to-day lives back up to a normal pace of life again is the mission, and making sure obviously that our healthcare services are there for all the ailments that we and our families will still suffer from.
Yeah, and with that in mind, we've been hearing from Ian Duncan-Smith speaking in this morning's papers. He says there's no point in publishing the figures for COVID every day. We don't do it for pneumonia, we don't death figures, we don't do it for the flu. So why do we continue to do it for COVID? Isn't it time to stop doing that? All it does is cause alarm.
Well, I'm sure that when we are able to get to a point of being back to normal, the DHSE and Number 10 will take a decision on how we continue to make sure people are safe and be able to get back to their normal lives. And I'm sure in due course that will be the case.
Yeah, but should we continue to publish the figures, I suppose, is the question.
Well, I think for as long as there is, that intense testing regime that we will need to continue to do to be able to manage our day-to-day lives and make sure that we are looking after each other, there will be, that substantial data set to share, whether it's published, on the front page of a newspaper every day, or whether it's something that those who are monitoring and making sure that they're looking after us have at their fingertips will no doubt be set out by the Department of Health in due course.
Okay, furlough scheme, let me talk about that if I may. The UK airline industry has called on the Treasury to extend furlough sector workers until the end of April. I was speaking to an airline pilot just yesterday and he said if they came off furlough, many of he and his colleagues would be losing their jobs. What are we going to do about that?
So I know that both the Aviation Minister and the Treasury continue to work sector by sector and make sure that the right balance is found, and I have no doubt that those conversations are ongoing, but I don't have any more information, Kate, that I can offer you at this point.
Can I also ask you what we were talking about a few moments ago with Labour MP Meg Hillier from the Public Accounts Select Committee about this investigation into just the huge amounts of fraud we're possibly looking at for those bounce back loans, not just companies that, are unable to pay back those loans. They think it may be 60% of the £46 billion that was handed out back last spring. But a concern that companies have just been completely defrauding people defrauding the government, the taxpayer, my listeners, you and me as a taxpayer for claiming that money. Do you agree with them that actually we should see publication of the names of all the businesses that have taken that money so that people can, put their hands up and go, well, hold on a minute. I know they didn't need the money. I know that's not a real company. Would that deter fraudsters? Would that help us catch some of those fraudsters and get that money back?
So I think really importantly to remember is that the priority at the time was to act really quickly to be able to protect both workers and businesses, to focus both on furlough and those grant schemes, really, which provided an absolutely critical lifeline to millions across the UK. And they were designed. The schemes themselves were designed to minimise fraud right from the outset. And I know that thousands of applications were either rejected or blocked. And I know that there is enforcement ongoing already, and I would suggest that everyone, if there is anyone out there who feels that, as you say, they know a business that hasn't followed the rules or has been taking the mickey, that there are fraud lines, the HMRC, that people can use to whistleblow. So I would always recommend that anyone who considers that to be the case should do so. But I know that the Treasury's focus absolutely will be on ensuring that enforcement is there.
I just finally must talk to you about schools. We're told with figures between 375,000, 385,000 pupils on any given day isolating. 1 in 20 school children, most of whom perfectly healthy children. They've just been in the same classroom as another child that has tested positive, often on a lateral flow test, later discovered that actually a PCR test will confirm that they haven't got COVID. Hundreds of thousands of children missing out on their education. How do we deal with this? Do we need to stop testing healthy children? Do we need to get rid of the bubbles? What's the solution?
So I know that the Department for Education are looking very closely at this. Certainly my postbag has a lot of frustrated parents in it. And I think as we roll out fully for all adults the vaccine programme, and we know that everyone has that protection, that there will be an opportunity for them to look again at how this works in order to both keep children safe and our community safe when we get to the new term in the autumn. And I know that work is ongoing. But the key right now to help us to be able to get back to normal life and much less restriction will be to ensure that everyone over 18 takes up the opportunity to get a vaccine as soon as they can.
OK, let me ask you about Matt Hancock, if I may. Security experts say it would take 10 minutes to find out who leaked the CCTV video of Matt Hancock snogging with his lover, because the person would have left a digital footprint on the system. Why doesn't the government know already who did this?
So I'm not privy to any of the, I know, extensive security work that goes on, but I have no doubt that they will be doing all they can to ensure that they understand how the problem in terms of that camera in the Secretary of State's office came about, and dealing with the outcomes accordingly.
OK, just a final thought, which I'm sure you will be able to comment on. Some suggestions, again in the papers this morning, that Mr Hancock is hoping to return to frontline politics before the end of the year. Would you welcome him back?
So the Prime Minister chooses his team, and he has brought forward a fantastic new Health Secretary in Sajid Javid, who brings an energy and a passion for looking after his constituents, and indeed now all of us. And I'm very confident that he's going to do a great job now that he's taken up the post.
Yeah, that wasn't my question, though. My question was, well, whether you would be happy to welcome Matt Hancock back before the end of the year into frontline politics.
So the Prime Minister will make his decisions. I think Matt will.
I'm asking you for your opinion, Mr Trevelyan. It is something that you could comment on, because I'm sure you know your own mind. Would you welcome him back?
So it's not for me to comment on who the Prime Minister wants to have in his cabinet, Kay, and I wouldn't dream of doing so. Matt worked unbelievably hard last year, doing almost gargantuanly impossible tasks to make sure that we got the health protections that we needed, and drove forward a phenomenal vaccine programme and testing programme through the course of a very, very hard year. But I think now he needs time to spend with his family and have a chance to get out of the limelight.